Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 4 of the Jays Banter podcast, your weekly voice of reason for the 2019 Toronto Blue Jays. I'm joined, as always, with my co-host, Mo. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Robert. How are you today?
Not bad. Well, off day today, so really a breath of fresh air for the Blue Jays not having to watch, although I'm kind of excited to watch this series coming up because, let's face it, doesn't matter how bad the Jays are, it's always fun to watch some baseball. And even though they came off two series that, they got swept by the Yankees, they won the Red Sox series, it was an exciting 6 games of baseball. Would you agree?
For sure. I'm watching the games this past week. It's been promising for the Blue Jays watching their young hitters have a nice approach at the plate and have some competitive baseball for once. It wasn't a frustrating sweep, and it didn't even feel like a sweep. I mentioned this in my caption yesterday. It didn't feel like a sweep. It just felt like a breath of fresh air watching some nice quality baseball. And it's okay to slip some games away, especially with a good team like New York. So it's fun seeing the Blue Jays batters battle and have that courage to come back in these games. I believe it was multiple times in the series. And facing a team coming up in Kansas City, it's always fun to have your young hitters face a team that's not overly too competitive and that's around your level. So it'll be fun to see players like Biggio, Gurriel, and Vladimir crush the baseball this upcoming Canada Day weekend.
Yeah, they lost 4 games over the past week. The 3 to the Yankees, obviously the sweep, and then the 1 to the Red Sox. But all of those games you mentioned, they didn't feel like a sweep. I think the common thread of when the Blue Jays get swept, and really when any team gets swept, is that they just look awful. They just look like they get beat. Like, you remember the Colorado sweep? They just look like a team that just absolutely quit. Like, it was a completely different vibe this time. They lost the Friday night in Boston on a walk-off in extra innings, and then all 3 games against the Yankees, they lost 2 one-run games and then a 2-run game. That was the valiant comeback, I believe, Monday, where they were down 10-2 and they came all the way back to make it within 2 runs, and it looked good. But, yeah, absolutely, certainly competitive, and I think Jamie Campbell actually mentioned that as well, how it didn't feel like a sweep at all. There was definitely some things to keep an eye out for, though, during that series, and one of them that we wanted to cover was Danny Jansen's future with the team. As many of you know, Danny Jansen not exactly having the year that a lot of Blue Jays fans thought they were. He was a promising September call-up last year and always had the reputation of being a bat-first catcher and the glove not so much advanced, but this year it's sort of been the exact opposite. He's been very good defensively. According to Fangraphs, he's got a positive 5 DRS, which is certainly well above average in that category, but his offense has significantly taken a hit. He comes into today hitting 184, just 3 home runs for a guy who was believed to have quite a bit of pop as a catcher, and an OPS just over 500. So certainly subpar offensive numbers. And this is all coming after a day where Danny Jansen played really well. Yesterday against the Yankees, he had 3 hits, including a home run, and he got on base all 4 times. So I guess what we wanted to talk about was, is Danny Jansen catcher of the future? They don't really have many other options up, but maybe they can pick someone up via a trade at the deadline. What is your thoughts about Danny Jansen, essentially? You believe that there's more in the tank there, or should they start viewing some other options as catcher?
Danny Jansen, it's kind of worrisome to look at his below Mendoza line stats this season, but you got to take in that he's only 24 years old, and it certainly is too early to worry about Danny Jansen, in my honest opinion. Danny Jansen has been a serviceable defensive catcher, as you mentioned, with a plus 5 DRS, and typically you look for a catcher either with a strong offensive tool set or either a strong defensive tool set. Unfortunately for Danny, with his offensive numbers not being the greatest right now, his defensive ability has made up for it. And right now we have seen that Danny Jansen is batting 184 with just 3 home runs, coming into the season as a power guy, as we've seen before in his brief September preview last season. And he struck out 46 times in 179 at-bats, and that's unusual to see for Danny Jansen, as in the minor leagues he was proven to be a contact-first hitter with a nice on-base percentage. And also, speaking about the Blue Jays backstop, as he said, is it in our best interest to acquire a catcher? I would say that. I would say that, but I feel like Danny Jansen, we have to write it out for Danny Jansen. Maybe for Luke Maley. Watching Luke Maley play, he's not the best offensive catcher, and I believe his defensive catching metrics have slid this season and fell off. So for me, it'd be a breath of fresh air to watch a Blue Jays catcher hit the ball, but we have seen the upside with Danny Jansen's defensive ability.
And you also have to remember that catching is not exactly a position where you're required to do a lot offensively. And this is a good point that I kept on making earlier back in 2015, 2016, that and I was a victim of this as well, about how underappreciated Russell Martin was. I feel like a guy that like Russell Martin, who can hit 20 home runs a year, hit for a decent average, get on base, also play good defense, is really undervalued in today's game. He might have been a little overpaid, might have been given a little too much money for a guy that was approaching on the other side of 30, but I think his contribution to the team was certainly invaluable. And I think now you're seeing just how valuable a player Russell Martin was for those 2015, 2016 ALCS Blue Jays teams. But Danny Jansen, catching, once again, not a position where you need a lot, but we need to see a little bit. We don't need a lot offensively, but we need to see a little more than we've seen so far. And his BABIP, we actually cited this right before the podcast started. His batting average on balls in play is .229, which is relatively low. It's certainly below average. It could be used as a sign to suggest that maybe he can hit the ball harder and pick up a few more hits. Maybe that he's getting a little bit unlucky. But at the same time, I think when you're watching him, the eye test is that he's not really hitting the ball that hard, and that the reason why his batting average on balls in play is simply because he's not making good contact. He's getting under the ball. He really hasn't been driving the ball at all this year, as you mentioned. Only the 3 home runs, and we're right at Canada Day, so that's certainly not a good sign. But I mean, if you have anything to add other than that,
yeah, it's kind of worrying that Danny Jansen has not seen the power supply, and we have not seen his power supply this season. But to be honest, there's not much of Blue Jays catchers in the system to really force his hand. We got the likes of Reese McGuire, who's not having a very good year in AAA right now. And I feel like to let Danny Jansen ride it out would be in the Blue Jays' best interest. He is a young catcher, as we mentioned before. He is 24 years old, and we have to remember that it is his first year at the major league level, his first full season, trying to understand the whole pitching staff and trying to understand the whole MLB and how they pitch to him. And I believe you mentioned this before the podcast that Danny Jansen spoke to, I believe it wasn't the media?
Yep.
About how he's just trying to get a feel of things this season. And speaking about Russell Martin, yeah, I believe he was underappreciated by Blue Jays fans. I believe in this game and era we have been spoiled by great catchers like Buster Posey, Russell Martin, and we just take it for granted. And this season, Russell is batting .255 with a pair of home runs and 122 plate appearances. And then just recently we saw him pitching. So he's just like a fun guy, Russell Martin. And in his Blue Jays years, 2015, it was a prime for him. He hit 20 home runs, had a serviceable .250 average, and played some nice defense as the backstop for the Blue Jays. So he was underappreciated, but for Danny Jansen, it's positive to see him in the series where he went yesterday. He did have a good game. To just see some positives come up for Danny would be really nice, and hopefully he can turn this first half after the All-Star break into a better second half.
I might be putting you on the spot here a little bit, but do you think that it could be at all possible what we saw with Lourdes Gurriel Jr. about how, the tools were there, but maybe you just need to go back to the minors for just to take a deep breath and relax a little bit? You don't think that could all be advantageous to him? I mean, I don't think that bringing up Reese McGuire is the move for the future. I think Danny Jansen is a better catcher than Reese McGuire is. I think that's why he's up here right now. McGuire is in AAA, but could that just be, for Danny Jansen to relax a little bit and maybe get back into hitting against below average pitching at the minor league level, build up his confidence, and then maybe that could work as a resolution for him at the major league level? Do you think that's at all a possibility for them to do, or do you think that'll be any help, or should he just write it out and continue playing at the major league level, hopefully that he'll develop on the fly?
I believe it is a strong possibility. I believe we've been hearing some buzz about that happening, and I mean, you wouldn't, if he comes back and becomes another Lourdes Gurriel Jr., I mean, we'll all love that, don't you think? And I feel like he'd benefit from that, going back to the minor leagues, just relaxing, and I believe Lourdes Gurriel Jr. did that, and he's sending a message to the Blue Jays saying, oh, don't never send me back again, I'm built for this league. And for Danny, just give him a breath of fresh air, going down in the minor leagues, knowing what he can do, hitting against pitchers he knows he can get hit again, build his confidence, come back up here and just produce. And I feel like Luke Maile would be the catcher up here. And for what the Blue Jays are right now, not a contending team, it wouldn't be the worst idea for the Blue Jays.
And you also have to remember what 2019 is for exactly. It's a year where these quote-unquote kids have the long leash. They're not going to win games this year, but at the very least, you got to have your cornerstones, or the guy you think are your cornerstones, playing at the major league level. And I think that's why this season's been a lot more watchable, in my opinion at least, than, let's say, last season. Even though they're probably going to finish with a higher loss total than they did last year, I feel that seeing every day your best three players essentially are your future. Lourdes Gurriel Jr., Cavan Biggio, and Vlad Guerrero Jr. Those are your three best players on the team right now, or at least your three best hitters. And it was a lot. I think that's a lot better to watch and a lot more exciting to watch as a fan than as opposed to last year, where you'd see Yangervis Solarte batting fourth and hitting ground balls that he wouldn't hustle out, or even Justin Smoke, really, a guy who I think Blue Jays fans came to fall in love with the recent years, that he's sort of turned his career around. You know that he's not necessarily part of the future, so I guess it's a lot. There's not a lot to hang on to with regards to his performance. But this year, watching Cavan Biggio, ever since being called up, be taking major league at bats and hitting the ball hard. Lourdes Gurriel Jr. playing at an elite level ever since being brought up from the minor leagues, and even Vlad, who hasn't exactly gotten off to the start that we all thought he would. Certainly not, an instant MVP candidate, but he himself too will obviously get the ball rolling eventually, as there's just too much talent in that bat too. So I think the possibility and the upside of these three guys is what really is the incentive to watch this team for the rest of the season.
For sure, and I just pulled up a stat here from Scott Carson on Twitter, and he says the Blue Jays continue to get no production from the catching position. I just wanted to add this in. It says their average is dead last in the league at 167, 29th in on-base percentage at 246, 30th in slugging percentage at 249. OPS is 495, which is dead last. Home runs, as we mentioned, Danny Jansen has 3. Luke Maile, I believe, has 1. That gives them 27th in the league. RBI, they're tied for 29th, and an extra base hits at 12. They are dead last. So as you can see, their catching position, even last year and this year, has been underperforming. And as you said, the Jays' young guns with Cavan Biggio and Lourdes Gurriel, it's certainly exciting to see them produce at this major league level, and hopefully the Blue Jays catchers can produce at the same level ASAP.
I was thinking about this yesterday, actually, and I'm thinking about looking at the guys who will be available at the trade deadline, preferably at the starting pitching market, and I think a big part of this was they were playing the Yankees, a team that is heavily in contention for a new starting pitcher, and I'm looking at the options available right now, and really the main options that you see are Marcus Stroman. Obviously, we talk about him at volumes, about him being traded at the deadline. You have Madison Bumgarner in San Francisco, and then two other names that I think don't really get mentioned as much are Trevor Bauer from Cleveland and Mike Minor from Texas, I believe. Yeah, Texas. And both Texas and Cleveland are 8 games over 500 right now. They're in contention for the award. I think if you're a Blue Jays fan, you're hoping for the Indians and the Rangers to keep winning. Because if they keep winning, these good arms like Minor and Bauer will be off the market. And that way, there'll be more of a demand for Marcus Stroman. Maybe you can get him at a premium. I think as of right now, you can legitimately make the argument that Stroman could be the best arm on the market, assuming that guys like, let's say, not Steven Strasburg, Max Scherzer aren't on the market. And I feel like you can get Marcus Stroman at a premium if you're the Blue Jays if the market for starting pitching keeps going down with the teams that are expected to sell or were expected to sell keep winning. I think that was an interesting thought. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Marcus Stroman will definitely be a premium and a lucky player to get at the deadline for another team. And such as a team in the American League East, where the Blue Jays will certainly demand blue chip prospect, borderline blue chip prospect, and he would come at a premium price. But then we also see players like Luis Castillo, which the New York Yankees have interest in. We see Matthew Boyd, who has a really good